talking what we were talking about off the air a little bit. So when I'm dealing with guests, right, I don't know what their computer savvy is. Sometimes they're really, really savvy. Sometimes they're not. So, I mean, it's kind of one of the things I live with the show is, and I get it too, because everybody's got their own specialties and their own skill sets. So not everybody's going to have the basic computer knowledge I do. Then again, some people like you probably have significantly more than I do, right? It's a matter of like who
everyone has their own way.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't. So what I've learned to do doing a show like this is I've learned to be flexible. Like I'm just very flexible with the people I'm dealing with, because you never know. Like you just never know what you're going to deal with, and just because they may lack on certain things in a fit, like from an aesthetic point of view, doesn't mean they can't be engaging. They don't have a great story or anything like that, right? Yeah, all right. So it's kind of like how I'm very, very open about that sort of thing. But how have you been, man? It's been a long time.
I haven't been on sabbatical. That's something that I have not been on. I got tired of social media.
Okay.
Completely. Like, I still have it. Actually, I left Twitter when it became what it is now.
Okay.
And what I mean by it is like, Twitter when it first started, like you could actually have decent feedback and forth, right? Now it's become a yelling match, and now it's actually like from behind the scenes, from what I used to do, and knowing that there are countless of people who did what I did. I would say that Twitter is mostly bots now.
It's becoming that way. Like it's designed to do one of two things now. Now, someone that has a very specific kind of a disagreement, it tends to try to put people that in polar opposite to those things.
Oh no! Wait, before we get to that, I'm talking about the technical aspect.
Yes.
Because you can pre-program, and I used to do this back when I was on Twitter a lot. I would spend my Sunday and I would program 7 days worth of tweets, a tweet an hour, right? Sometimes even a tweet every 30 minutes or 15 minutes. And I would just hit go and never check Twitter again until next Sunday. That's what I mean. Like the political part about it, we'll get to that in a minute. But that fact that you were just dealing with other people doing the same thing was the first stepping stone, I think. And then when it became political, and you got these two polar opposites just yelling at each other, the issue is that you cannot have a conversation with a limited character. Well, you could, but you can't really engage with somebody or persuade somebody to see a different point of view if you only have 3 sentences to do it.
Actually, it was interesting during the height of the vaccine mandates over here. I actually had some really, especially when the trucker protest strike, whatever you want to call it, happened here. I was having some very interesting conversations on Twitter. Some of them were like dead ends, and you knew it, but some of them were really, really interesting, right? Because you'd come in and they have this expectation of what you stood for based on what side of the fence you are on, and it was really cool to just smash those perceptions, right? And what happened, and on both ends of the spectrum, like I said, I think the government overreached here big time, and I think we're still paying for it. We're not arguing that. That's not the point. But here's the thing: people would go in this with this expectation of, I got this kind of on the cult thing, or I believe in the latest conspiracy theory, and I deal with a couple of those guys, shut them up really hard, or I would deal with someone that's like, okay, why are you doing this? Like, so then eventually, when all the bullshit gets nailed down, it's like, well, why do you see it the way you see it? And then we have a real conversation, and it's interesting. I would have people, again, I don't really care if you agree or you disagree with me. That's not the point. No, that's not the point. The point is, can you have a real legitimate engagement with someone that sees things differently than you do? And I could, not with everybody, but there are people out there that's like, you know what? I understand where you're coming from, right? And that's all you really want, right? Because if you understand that, it's suddenly it humanizes everybody, right? Right? And it's one of those things where you just got to it's a lost art. Like for a lot of people, though, that is the one thing that is true. It's a lost art. It's like, I don't need to see things this way you do. We disagree on some stuff too, but at the same time,
well, the problem with that is, and I'm gonna plug my new book that I'm writing right now. I'm actually writing, and I've been working on this book for going on a year and a half, 2 years. Um, the interesting thing is with this book is I lost it, which means it was deleted from my computer over user error, and
Oops.
then I've had to retype it. Um, I retyped it from memory because I've done so much research into this book, right? And it is about why we are in the U.S. Specifically, and it is specifically about the U.S. Why the U.S. is in this position that it is now,
Mhm.
and it's coming from somebody who's conservative, and I am conservative. Um, I I do support conservative values, and when I was younger, I was very liberal, and it is
Yeah.
the true fact. Young liberal, old conservative. Um, when you start making money, you start to be think more conservative because you start to say, wait a minute, what is my tax going to pay? What is this going to pay? Right, the whole thing. So looking that and being someone who loves film, makes my own movies, and grew up during the second wave of the golden age of cinema, right? Um, I don't know what we have now. I've seen the movies today. It's like, oof. But anyways, going through that, I spent a year. There was an old movie. There was an old movie that I saw. I don't remember the name, but they're in college, and I think it's 1980s movie. And this guy is just sitting in front of the TV the whole time. And at the end of the movie, he finishes watching TV, and he says, "Now I can write my dissertation." So basically, his dissertation on TV. So I've been for the like a year and a half. I just sat there watching old TV series from the 90s, 80s. I went back to the even to the 50s, and just watching a series all the way through. And a lot of lack of sleep, stuff like that. And I started watching TV series today, and I think there's a very deep impact on how children are raised and how they were raised in the 90s, from the 90s until now, that has limited our communication skills.
Hmm.
And we look at this and we look at children being raised in technology. There's like I was talking to someone the other day and they're like, yeah, I got my books all in my phone, right? And I'm like, I have books on my phone too, but there's something to be said about holding a book in your hand.
Hmm.
And this is Crossroads of Title, so Robert
Very,
Jordan.
very, very
I,
good book.
I
I enjoy
I
Jordan.
haven't finished it. I haven't finished it. Um, I'm reading right now. I'm actually reading four books at the same time. One of them is going to be very hard because I'm reading this one, which was given to me by a professor where I work at the university. It's
Okay.
called, and he went to the States and he studied Chicano culture. And so it's a book on Chicano culture
Very
from
cool.
California, in Japanese that I'm reading. So looking at it that way, looking how these children were raised in technology, it's very clear to see that the and this is the problem with schooling too, because it's gone into the schools. These people who were raised in a certain way where communication is no longer about sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Now it's like words will hurt me and words are violence when it's not. And so because they're in that frame of thinking, they're able to jump quickly into argumentative rather than listening for a comment and trying to discuss. And that's where
Hmm.
you gotta get past that barrier. Once you get past that barrier, then you go like, these are just words. Let's have a discussion. And many people will walk away from you. I've lost, I would say, close to 80% of the people that I would have considered friends because I'm no longer I'm not that person where you're like, this word offends me, therefore you shouldn't say it. I'm like, no, you don't control language and you don't control what comes out of my mouth. That's one of the things that's very important. So trying to see that and then watching it unfold extremely in Twitter and then extremely in Facebook and going on from social media to social media, I just thought I just left because the Twitter one was very clear. Whatever gets the most clicks and whatever gets the most clicks becomes the whatever most outrageous. And
Hmm.
then it moved into Facebook, and then it moved into this, and then when they came back with the censorship in Facebook and all this stuff, specifically when they came when they started this news guard stuff where a company gets to decide what is factual news and what is not. And it can be as simple as a misquote. It can be as simple as a word in the wrong spot, but they don't do it to the other side. This off balance stuff. When they went that way, they forgot to adjust the algorithm. Right? So they started censoring people, but they forgot to adjust the algorithm to a certain point where the algorithm is still stuck on that. What's most outrageous will be the part they're trying to feed you.
Well, it's the business end of it, right?
Yeah.
These social media platforms make money by getting people to engage in these platforms, getting this information
Yes.
out there. So I don't think it really was a mistake, more along the lines of the fact that we're trying to have our cake and eat it too, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you're focusing on that. Like like from my end of things, I I'm I'm fascinated by language. Like I go back
Hmm.
to something I watched I watched one of the podcasts I listen to when I'm not doing mine is Jocko Willnick's podcast. And what I really like about his stuff is I love book breakdowns. He actually will go
Hmm.
take an old book, he'll read it on the air, at least parts of it on the air, and they will critically talk about it with his troops, which I think is a really fascinating thing. That a guy with like a Navy SEAL does this with his troops on a regular basis, and he
Hmm.
does this live on the air. It's really fascinating. He did George Orwell's 1984,
Hmm.
specifically not the novel, the appendix, because the appendix is the true ending of the story, right? The
Hmm.
story in itself is of a moment in time in that culture, but the end
Hmm.
of the story is the after it was liberated. And one of the things that was talked about in that was the importance of controlling language, right?
Yes.
And the idea is, so the idea of freedom is always a problem for government, because if I always want to be free, I've told the story on the air. It creates I'm somewhat of a problem in that I will cooperate with authority, but I won't cow down to authority, and it puts them in a very odd situation there. I'm not gonna look them dead in
No.
the eye. I'll cooperate, but I'm not gonna.
Hmm.
I'm not cowering to it. I have this idea of freedom and who I am and and my own value. If you can eliminate the idea of self worth, the idea of freedom, the idea of these
Well,
things,
well,
people will
um,
cooperate.
if you let me interject here, and sorry, I was looking for my 1984 copy because I wanted to see if I could if mine came with an appendix or not.
Yes,
Um,
they all do. They all
um,
do. They
so
all.
I'll,
Yeah.
I'll I'll take mine apart. So um, it's in my actual library. I keep the books in here that I'm reading or the ones that I reread over and over and over again. Um, the cooperation part is very interesting because this is interesting about 1984 is that it didn't start off as that. The society was not that in the beginning, right? It had to get there,
Yes.
right? And when you look at that, and then you look at where we are now, and there's many people that go 1984. They're screaming it from everywhere, right? But they don't really see what they're either screaming it because they've heard the quote somewhere, but they haven't really looked into it. And um, uh, there's a man, Jordan Peterson, very famous, as you know.
Hmm.
But I've listened to a lot of his lectures. But one of them that I like the best is the where he makes the point about the 3 mile quote, where he goes, "No one ever gets you to do something bad."
Hmm.
And he says this quote in three different ways. One of them he talks about Nazi and the Polish police, um, right? When they got Polish officers to do a lot of the killing. I think it's Polish. Yeah. And then the other one is how you get people to go one way. And they never tell you we're going to make you do this really horrible thing.
No.
And they tell you, "Oh, just do this. Just do this. Just do this." And but before you realize it, you're 3 miles to from where you were, right?
Well, it's okay. So in the case of the Nazi, I know the Nazi story. The idea how you can get someone to kill somebody, right? And the
Yeah.
reason and the reason that's important to actually understand is no one sets up like, hey, we're not gonna just this isn't right. But what happens is it's a community unit. If you can convince enough of them that this is a necessary thing to do, hey, we don't want to do this, but this absolutely has to be done.
Yeah, yeah.
What happens is people that are kind of like outliers are now kind of pressured to join in, because now it's about camaraderie. It's about
Yes.
this is my friend. I'm not going to let him do this alone, right?
Well,
So
it's that, but it's also you don't want to be the outsider.
I find see a guy like me doesn't mind that.
Exactly.
But me, if I'm seeing a friend that's going to suffer through something, right? I'm more inclined to help. It's like if I can help ease that suffering, this is just the psychology. I'm just explaining the psychology of this,
Well,
right?
no, I agree. I agree with you. I know where you're going with the psychology thing. But here's the question though: when is enough for you?
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. This is where it gets really insidious, because once you cross a line, it's now not so hard to cross that line anymore, right?
Exactly.
It's not so hard to cross that line. Now you'll go even. A very famous professional wrestler once quoted, "Try to seek heaven, try to see to be the best. We always fall short. Try to go down to depravity. You can never go low enough, right? There's never
Mm,
right. You can sink as low as you want. What happens is once this becomes a normal thing, right? You can get people to do anything eventually. It doesn't.
oh yeah.
Again, none of these guys. None of these guys. The most damning thing you can ever hear for someone say is, "I'm just doing my job," because it's the easiest excuse not to act when something's wrong, right? So, and this is right because that's the first step, and then just it's a slow, insidious crawl, and then one day you wake up and you're muck deep, and you're not sure how you got there. You don't like it's not one of those. It's not a one moment thing. It's a
And
journey.
what people don't realize though is like this is not just for that. It's for every part of your life. Like
Absolutely.
right now, I've been trying to lose weight, and I've actually managed to lose some weight. But many people will go to the gym one day expecting to lose what it took them 10 years to gain. It doesn't happen that way. It
No.
takes time to lose that weight because it took time to put it on.
Yes.
And people will ask me like, why did you decide to work out? I'm like, I woke up one morning and I got out of bed and I have a standing mirror near my bed, basically where I check my clothes, and I sat up out of bed and I could see my gut hanging over the bed. I was like, no, I can't have that. But I didn't see it getting there,
No.
right? And that's the thing. Like, so we don't see it. And being an outsider now, and when COVID hit, and everyone started going through the whole the motions of it, right? Um, that's when I really started seeing people shift into that way, right? And because you had all these people um, pushing for the denial of other people's rights, but at the same time, you had the government backing certain groups only.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely.
so if we go back to the news footage, you can see um, BLM riots still happening, still burning down cities during COVID. Um, you can see pro-mask marching, but you don't. But very few of them are wearing their masks. BLM people, very few of them wearing their masks as they're rioting and burning stuff down. But when the trucker protest happened, and if I don't know if you saw the Canadian one.
Oh yeah. No.
Wait,
No.
are you in Canada?
I'm in Calgary right now.
Okay,
So
okay.
I
When,
know
when
all.
that happened right there, and then the government came down hard on them,
Yes.
and like, but not just here's where the government overreach in Canada. And I've been watching Canada. I have one of my friends is from Vancouver. One of the friends that actually stuck by me through this whole thing because he actually likes discussion. Um, where when we went through it, well, not me personally, Canada, right? When they went
Mhm.
through it, um, he's like, oh, he was like, oh no, they're not gonna take it that far. But then you see people who donated like $20 to a cause, their banks being frozen,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
that right there, in my opinion, right there, I would have walked to the bank and said, "They're empty my bank account right now and close it."
No, no, no. That did start to happen. In some places that did start to happen. The so the trucker protests here, it depends on which Canadian you ask how it was. Some Canadians see it as an occupation. I see it as a protest, right? Just based on the tactics. Now, people might disagree with me with that. Some people will, some people won't. But for me, this is no different than what happened in India the previous year fire when tractors went to New Delhi. It's the same thing.
Or a couple years ago, the truckers in France.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just like there's lots of examples of what the truckers did in Canada as protests elsewhere. All right. And heck, even Canada backed up the Indian farmer protest a year prior. So I look at, but the thing is, democracy is ugly up close. And there's a couple things about it from a Canadian perspective that I think. I said this on a few things a while ago, and I'll say it again. If you think that what the truckers did was a protest, then what the government did was wrong. If you think the truckers are terrorists, then actually what the government did was worse. And the reason why is if Ottawa was held hostage, if any of those truckers had guns and you'd never even tried to talk with them, right, you would have seriously risked the city of Ottawa's health, safety, and livelihood of people around them doing it, right? I think, but I also think this has also undone Canada to some degree. It's created a divide in Canada wasn't there before. Again, for me, I see this. I
wouldn't say it wasn't there before. I would say it was still in the infant stage of growing that divide.
But the thing is, it's not as pronounced as it is right now. If you ask Canadians again, if you ask a Canadian about the truckers' protest, some of them will say it's the most selfish thing they've ever seen. Right? Some like me will say it's a protest of government overreach. That's what I see it as, no more, no less. Right? And that's my opinion on it. Right? Now, that all said, it also depends on what you watch too. If you were watching the truckers' protest on Twitter exclusively and just watching the footage, because actually this is where Twitter's great. Twitter, you can get minute by minute updates.
But how it was being framed is the problem.
No. Actually, that's the best part. This is the best part. It's not you can skip the framework, because this is what happens in situations like that. You're getting so much data from so many different places. You can actually get a really informed opinion. It's no longer about the media being the thing about Twitter. This is the thing about Twitter and social media. This is the real thing. From a real-time news perspective, it is the best way to get news if you know what you're doing, because it's real time. You're seeing real footage, real moments, real. And the thing is, it's not Rebel News. Like it's not CBC. It's not Global. It's ordinary people who are there taking pictures and showing you exactly what's going on. And it's amazing because it gives you such a different perspective than what you would have gotten if you had watched it from the news, right? So that's the thing, right? That's why that is actually one of the best benefits of social media is if you use it correctly, you can actually get a more informed opinion of what's going on in real time.
But there's the problem though. There's the problem right there. You said it yourself. If you use it correctly.
But okay, I can't control what people do. I can only get right. I can't, and I'm not worried about that. So this is me. When I was watching the protest, I was watching it very specifically from Twitter. I ignored the news. The reason why I ignored the news was very simple. Why would I go there when I can literally watch it in real time? Right? I can watch it in real time, so I can get my own opinion just based on what I've seen. So on Twitter, like for example, when the protests spread, not just in Iowa, but it was all over Canada, I was watching people talking about being dismissed because they wouldn't get vaccinated, and not in all races, all creeds. You were seeing people from all walks of life talking about government overreach.
Well, let me ask a question let me sidestep real quick here and ask a question. What do you think about vaccination?
I think this current vaccine is horrible. Based on the information I've been reading, based on the information I've been reading on this particular vaccine, it is the worst thing we've ever done, and for a couple different reasons. The first is, okay, there's no way to criminally prosecute the pharmaceutical companies because the reality of the situation is we can't have. I can guess based on certain symptoms that have happened. You can do all kinds of little studies and things like that. Doctors are coming out worldwide right now with some side effects that are mind-bogglingly bad.
Yeah.
If you are willing to look for them, you will find them, and it's not great.
Yeah.
Not only that, the numbers indicate that it's very possible this particular vaccine has actually increased COVID, not decreased COVID.
Yeah.
Right? But what makes this bad is, again, now someone listening to that will say, well, you're not looking, I'm looking at the FDA. I'm looking at
Yeah.
the New England Journal of Medicine. I am looking at government reports. They are telling you, heck, at the company's own stuff, they are telling you this out front. It's out in the open. If you really want to
Yeah.
look at it, it's there. But the thing the thing is, what I learned about this time. So here's the thing. But the idea that this thing made you safe, the commercial that was played for it, right, and made it such that it skipped a lot of these processes. So in the future, if people have problems because of the shot, because I can't tell you every side effect or everything about it in the future. There's not enough data out there. That's frightening because
that's the problem is like people today. And just to put my cards on the table, I am not vaccinated. I have not had a single one of these shots. Japan did not force the vaccination. Japan did not shut down. Japan shut down people coming in from overseas, but they did not shut down the government, the work. You can still go to work, the whole thing. And the economy has survived so far, right? But
you guys are interesting over there. I've watched you guys. You're interesting.
Yeah. And this is thing, like when we're watching the world, right? And when I go out to see how these people have been treated, especially like the internment camps in Australia, right?
Yes. Australia is the worst. We're not far behind them. Like we weren't.
You're getting there. You're getting there.
Yeah.
I've seen the hotels in Canada.
But here's the thing. This is what this taught me, and I say it like this. First off, if the government says trust the science, go affirm the science. Don't trust it. Affirm it. Go read it. Go read it. The second thing. Here's the second thing, though, and I say it like this: don't fall in love with an idea. Instead, explore the idea. Like, you're going to have your own beliefs, but you need to explore them, and you have to be open to the fact that you might be wrong. The fact of the matter is, right now, there are friends of mine in Canada looking at getting their 4th or 5th shot, which is insane to me. This particular shot in particular is insane. There's not enough data on any of this. But again, now in general, I'm not pro or anti-vaccine. Just so people understand, I'm not pro or anti-vaccine. I'm pro-treatment. If you have a sickness and you have something bothering you, if a treatment works for you, God bless you. That's it. That's my entire stance. I used to be a hardcore anti-vaxxer once upon a time. This put all my cards on. I have a slightly different take on it now, in the sense that I also realize that people have to do what works for them. I'm a big enough man in this world to acknowledge that I don't have all the answers, and I'm a lot more open about what people do. But I also look at it like this, right? One, don't force me to do something. You're right. If you're trying to force me to do something, your science is not right. And two,
exactly.
This is the second part of this. My dad's a naturopath. What his specialty was he would see I would see the side effects of these medicines in real time, based on the patients he'd see. I've seen it with antidepressants. I've seen it with opiates. I've seen it. When we release something early into the environment, it has never gone well, ever. And I've never seen it not go work great. So again, this is my opinion on this particular shot. What worries me about a shot like this is people, again, we're talking about those lines that are crossed. People are going to be okay with the fact that they were essentially guinea pigs in the future. And
they're going to find a way to justify it in their own mind. They're going to find a way to justify it. Like, I was doing it, and this is where it got off the rails, and this is where social media actually caused it to go off the rails faster. Was when people were saying, like, I'm doing this to keep you safe. You should be doing it to keep me safe too. Like the mask thing, the mask things were like, I'm wearing my mask to be safe. You should be wearing a mask to keep me safe because you can get me sick. Like they started putting the onus on their own body autonomy on other people.
Yes.
And when they started doing that, and it started exploding on social media that that's what they should do, and even pushed more by the people who want to force people to get the vaccine, either through extortion or bribery. And I do say extortion because when someone comes to you and says you cannot go to work unless you get this vaccine, it's extortion, right? They're
Coercion, for
extorting
sure.
your life. Yeah.
It's definitely
Um,
coercion, right?
and then and there was even that one the Facebook. I don't know if you've seen the story, but the Facebook shop. This woman's store was closed during the vaccine. She started selling her goods on Facebook. People were paying her online, and she would put it outside the door, right, or ship it delivery. And they came and knocked and said you didn't close down your store. They were going to fine her
Yeah.
for selling stuff online.
Oh, dude, I saw so much cheating during the lockdown era in Canada because they had to. In Ontario, where I was, I like about 65,000 stores, small businesses disappeared. And and this is the
The
part
big box
that
one survived, right? The big
what
box store survived.
oh, of course it did, right? They're always going to like you said, but the thing is, right? I look at it two ways. I look at the fact that Pfizer made $37 billion, and that was those 65,000 plus whatever else was lost during that time. It was a wealth transfer. That's how I see it. Right now,
Yeah.
again, now here's the other thing, and I want to make this very clear too. If someone actually chose to take that vaccine, right, because of their own beliefs and their choice and volitions, no knock to them.
All for it.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, right. No knock to them. It's their choice. Now, I wouldn't, but that's because again of the data I've seen. I just would. Um, but again, someone listening to me, again, I'm sure some friends in Canada will listen to this and go, "What the hell is he thinking?" It's like it's simple. Look at the FDA stuff. Look at the U.S. government stuff. The hell, Britain stuff, Israel stuff.
Mhm.
They're all saying the same thing. They're all saying the exact same thing. It's just not advertised. But if you look, you'll see it for yourself, and you won't like what you
not
see.
not not just
Yeah.
that. If you actually looked at the stuff, right, and you actually look at the research,
Mm-hmm.
then you look at the news stories that were quietly pushed out during a low news cycle, where you have the CDC rolling back the numbers because they overinflated the numbers. Where you have in New York early on, every almost every death was COVID related. Someone getting shot was COVID related, and just these numbers being inflated because the government was giving hospitals new technology for their hospitals, right?
Yep. Well,
So
it's more than that. It's also the fact that again it heightens the average. I think the most interesting things about it, if you look at who was advertising for the media, the big
mhm,
advertiser, it was the pharmaceutical industry. 2020,
yes.
2021, 2022, even this year, although it's less this year, the pharmaceutical industry was a major proponent of the media advertising, which creates a huge
Mhm,
conflict of interest. So if I report that
exactly.
again, right, it creates a huge one. Like I said, no one, they're never going to come out and say that the vaccine didn't work. They're never going to come out and say that
Oh
this
no.
thing damaged. It's never going to be said. So I mean, it's almost like we're going back to the 50s. So I can't remember what the name of that drug was back in the day. We're going to go through that process again for this thing,
Mm,
right? Again,
I think it
that's
was
just
thalatamine or something like that.
well, it's an old drug, and the thing about it is, um, so I mean that's the history, and it's one of those things where you have to just go. We don't learn. We just don't. But again, this is something I've learned. We fall in love with ideas. We don't necessarily look at the truth. We fall in love with ideas, and those ideas, as long as if we buy an idea, we'll go along with it all the way to the bitter end. Trying to
Yeah.
change someone's mind that's set in stone is one of the hardest things to do because
Well,
it's
you
it.
can even with medical research, you can hand them the medical research and say, look, this is what was advised to me by a medical physician. You
Mhm.
know, and that's why I don't have to take this vaccine, and that's why I didn't take it, because I was advised, you know, secretly by the doctor. Because in Japan, if you advise people, and this is something that's sad about the doctors and why many doctors now are starting to get pissed off. In Japan, if doctors advised you properly for your health condition, about the vaccine, um, and they did that publicly, right? They would lose their license.
Yep. Well, that
So,
was the
so
medical.
that's insane.
Well, it's because any of the modern, like the modern Western, I'm going to include Japan in this, although Japan has a slightly different take on vaccines. And
Yeah.
because of your own history with vaccines, everybody should look up, if they really want to understand the Japanese take on vaccines, the MMR vaccines of the 90s. Those are the vaccines you should, and look at Japan's reaction to it. That is required reading if you want to understand the Japanese outlook on vaccinations. It is huge.
Mm.
It's a big part of their history. Medical history, I should say, not, but it's a big part of how they look at medicine.
But it's changing though.
Sure
Like
it is.
no, because I teach at at a nursing college,
Yeah.
um,
Oh yeah.
and I did a survey for the past 2 years. I did the in 2020 I didn't do a survey, but I did a survey in 2021. I did the same survey in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
I asked them, "What do you think about vaccination?" And they're like, we got it, we should get it. I'm like, what about people who don't get it? Should they be forced and held down to get it? Some of them, not all of them, but some of them said, if possible, we should go door to door and hold them down and give them the jab, if
Mm-hmm.
possible. I'm like, that's not how we do medicine, you
No,
know?
it's not. It doesn't. Medicine doesn't work that way ever. Like, okay, even like again, I have a naturopath background, so so a common thing for depression for a guy, I would recommend would be something like zinc and vitamin C. A very
Mm,
simple remedy. It's very simple.
yep.
It's already old. It's an old way of doing it. It works for most people, but it doesn't work for everybody. It
No.
doesn't. So again, I could try to force everybody into this nice little box, but the truth of the matter is, not everybody is exactly the same. Now, there might be something else. Now, I might try something else, like say, for example, vanilla, coffee, and peppermint.
Yeah.
Right, right, and that
But,
might
but but
be.
you should also like, if stuff doesn't work for you and you're sick, you know, this is where I find the interesting thing, because and I had this discussion with someone else the other day, because we were discussing, the TV show MASH, Alan.
Yeah.
There's a very dark episode where they're trying to stop this general from going to fight on a hill where everyone's gonna die, right? And Alan Alda's character Hawkeye removes this guy's appendix, right? To stop this general from going. And in there he's tormented by it. His friend won't help him with the procedure, and he goes, it was when we talked about it, he goes, it was perfect, it was pink, it was healthy, but I took it out anyways, trying to stop the war an appendix at a time, when doctors are not supposed to remove healthy organs. Doctors are not there to make you sick. But with the pharmaceutical companies being so in bed with the hospitals, many of them, trusting your own physician is hard.
You can't. That's the like if like. And by the way, I'm going to say this with this preposition. I
Mm.
think most doctors, I think 90% of the doctors I've met want the absolute best for their patients. I think same with nurses, same with EMTs. But the thing is, the fact of the matter is, most people don't understand their own medical industry. In the United States is the worst example of this. The insurance companies have a big say on what a doctor can and cannot prescribe to a patient. And the fact of the
Yes.
matter is, and the fact of the matter is, what does that mean? It means that an insurance company, not a scientific professional, just someone with a pen, basically
Oh,
an
I've seen it.
administrator.
I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it.
Yeah, yeah.
I had to drive my friend who has cystic fibrosis.
Hmm.
Um, that's for those who don't know, those are when you get blisters in your kidneys. It's a genetic disease,
Hmm.
and there's like, this was back. Oh my God, this was back. I think it was 2005
Hmm.
or 2005. I was crashing on his sofa, right? Um, Actually, 2000, yeah, no, 2005. Yeah, I was crashing on his sofa, and I was on a leave back from Japan, so I went back home. Um, and he woke me up like somewhere around like 4 in the morning. He goes, "I gotta go to the hospital," because it gets really painful for those who don't know, when the cysts pop in your kidneys, and
Oh,
it's
it's incredibly painful.
Yeah. So I go, okay. So just to give you the view here, right? We were living in Hesperia, which is near, which is the high desert, right, of California. And we had to drive almost to Moreno Valley, back to where my university was in Riverside, California, which is when there's no traffic, going 80 miles an hour, it's still an hour and a half drive,
Okay.
right?
90 minutes.
So, so we were sitting there going like, so as we're driving down, I see hospital after hospital after hospital, and we can't go to those because his insurance only lets him go to that one specific hospital.
Yep. Oh yeah.
It's insane. It's
No.
insane. And I was,
Oh yeah.
why should the insurance companies have that much power? And I've looked at this, and then I became a big proponent for and this was pushed by a couple of right wingers, especially someone like Ben Shapiro, where it's like extreme case medical coverage,
Yeah.
where that should be free. You have a heart
Yep.
attack, you're about to die, free. But daily health care, you get to spend that money however you want, wherever you want, whichever hospital you want. That right there would be free medical care for everybody, I think.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be free medical. Okay, United States is a much more complex system. You like okay in terms of
Well, I've
I,
studied it, I know.
yeah, yeah.
So.
I'm just saying. I live in Canada. I have anything
Yeah,
that happens to me, I can go to the hospital. I'm not going to get $1 million bill. I'm just not going to do that, right? So I say that I say, and in the United States, that is not a guarantee. You go to a
no,
hospital there, you might get a like on these ginormous bills that make no sense to have, but and then that's the way. Like the medical system, the thing is, once I understood this in the early 2000s, the medical industry today is about creating customers, not curing people.
I
And
agree with you there.
once you understand that, you understand the whole system. And it's not just in the United
Hello?
States. It's hello. Am I there?
Yeah, okay, you froze for a minute. So can
Okay.
you go back to once you understand that?
Once you understand that, you understand the real nature of the medical industry, which is it's not
Mm,
about the health of the person anymore. And it hasn't been for a very, very long time. And because of that, and because of that, you have to you come to that realization. Then the question that logically happens sooner or later once you see that pattern for itself is well then why would I trust them with anything? And that's a
exactly.
very and that's the thing, right?
But it's like a cycle though. It's like a cycle, and then I'm gonna sidestep a little bit here a little bit more, but so it's this cycle, and the reason why I'm gonna sidestep this is because this is also something else that I'm covering in my book. Um, we go back to the 1950s and 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first feminist movement, the very first one, the first feminist movement, you have women are equal, women are the same as men. And and this is something that's bad to do. You should never base medical policy on cultural norms. You shouldn't. So what they did was they stopped testing different medication for different people, for women and men. They said this is the same medication for both men and women. And what started happening in the 1960s and 70s was the painkillers designed for everybody weren't working on women or they weren't working on men. They were either too strong or too weak.
Mm-hmm.
So people were waking. This is where you got a lot of the horror stories in the 1970s and 80s, where people were waking up frozen, but they could feel everything during their surgeries because the anesthesia wasn't working. They could
Mm-hmm.
feel every cut. Um, when they took pain medication for after that, it didn't work, so they had to take more and more and more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were designing that. So in the late 80s and 90s, they went back to designing medication for women and medication for men. So because they're like this doesn't work, so we have to go back to the old standard where women are different than men, and we're going back to that same cycle again. Just like the clothing fashion changes every 10 years, right? We're going back to that same thing again. Now they're trying to say one blanket treatment for everybody, and we can't do that. There's no blanket treatment for everybody. There's nothing like that. And
No.
and what's confusing it even more is the social norms now, especially in the U.S., where they're trying and I really dislike parents who are doing this, but you have parents coming out saying that their 2 year old is not the biological sex that they were born with. And the 2 year old told them, you can. 2-year-olds don't know crap. They don't. And people trying to fit into that group think, people trying to jump into this whole thing is causing a lot more damage, which is leading to this whole idea of medication for all. This one pill will fix everything. And the pharmaceutical companies are just sitting there in the back going like, yeah, sure, why not? Just give us our money. Right? It's
Well,
insane.
it's I think this is a bigger issue, and this is where
I agree.
I am. We've become used to being exploited. If we want to make this really,
Yes.
if you really want to break it all down, we can talk about all these individual things. The
Mm.
truth is, we have become used to being exploited. We don't. This is a back in my day kind of thing. I being a freelancer, I've had to learn how to fight. And what I mean by that, not with my fist, but that ability just to say no, that ability to walk away, that ability to say, this isn't worth it for me, brother, right?
Yeah.
That ability to say that and mean it and follow through on that,
Mm.
that's where I'm at. I don't
But
cooperate with
not, but
anybody.
not, but not just that, because of what you do. And this is, and I'm going to throw my hat in the ring there too, because I run my own companies. Like, well, it's one umbrella company that does many things, right? But you're able to start over,
Mhm.
pick yourself up, and say, well, that didn't work. Let me do another thing.
Mhm.
The younger generation, and this it is my day kind of thing, isn't it? The younger
It is
generation can't do
be
that,
very.
right?
I wouldn't say they can't. That I'm going to push back on. It's not that they can't. It's that it really comes down to this. It's what they're used to, and this is our fault. Like we gotta be very perfectly honest about this. This is our
I
fault,
agree. I
right?
agree.
We like in the sense that we have we should have stood up to some of the things that were going on much, and I mean
Much sooner.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
because the truth of the matter is this, and this is it, right? We're rich compared to most of the rest of the world. We're rich, not
Compared
all of
to
it.
99% of the world, yeah.
Yeah, we're rich, right? So here's the thing: we're comfortable. If you're going to push back against these things, you're going to be pushing back against the very things that make you comfortable.
Mm,
So in the right when I was a kid, I still remember the last major auto strike in Canada. I still remember the
mm,
last one. They were willing to go die on that hill. They're going to fight for everything they got. They got it. Then that flash forward to my high school years. The teachers went on strike, and when the government told them to go back to work, they did. And what I realized, and that was a problem. The teachers, again, were afraid to lose. Somewhere along the way, we
mm.
became, as a culture, afraid to lose.
Well, see, this is the problem, and I see this problem in the U.S., um, and it is a growing problem because I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but there's teachers in the U.S. that go in to teach, but they just go into a special room and they sit there for 8 hours, read a book or pass the time, right? Then they go home because they,
Yeah,
they don't have the ability to teach, right? But they can't be fired. They reach tenure. Like you work in a U.S. school, I think it's 2 years or 3 years. You get tenure, which means you can't be fired unless you do something very egregious. And the teachers' union. So if they go on strike, all those teachers that are doing nothing and getting paid for it, of course they're going to go back to work because they're so comfortable in that I don't have to do anything. I just go here. You have teachers in the U.S. that are in kindergarten coming out about their sexual values to their kindergarten class. Like, when did schools become your free therapy session, right? Because they're so comfortable now that they won't get fired for that because they know that they'll just do whatever they need to do to go with whatever the flow is.
I I I I've interviewed a few teachers in the states. I don't know. Some of them would tell you I don't know what you're talking about. I think it really depends on the state there. I think more than anything else. But
In San Diego, a teacher was
yeah,
someone didn't use their pronoun and they won a $30,000 lawsuit.
Yep.
In UCLA, where I studied I studied there for a semester, and I taught for a semester as a TA. In UCLA, a student, his own professor fired because the professor corrected his English in an English essay. Right? So the U.S. teachers right now, the new teachers that are coming up are dealing with this, and there was that one Senate hearing where a Harvard professor, and I'll say this flat out right now: if I had to hire a lawyer, I would never hire a lawyer from Harvard if the
Mhm.
standards are the standards are right now, because the standards have dropped so low. You have a Harvard professor at a Senate hearing, looking like a fool because she wouldn't answer that women are the people who can have children, and instead of answering the question or instead of remaining silent, she starts to try to, I would say, degrade the senator for asking the question. And you can see it, like, and this is all over the YouTube as well. You can just hear the way she's responding is almost like a high school Valley Girl. I don't know if you know that reference, the Valley Girls.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
Uh-huh. Oh no, I totally do.
so, so these professors, and being a teacher myself, and being at one point a professor, I'm looking at the teaching and stuff like that. And when I told this to one of my other friends, I'm like, UCLA right now have segregated dorms in Los Angeles, where blacks have started to segregate themselves into black only dorms, under the guise of safe spaces, right? So moving backwards in segregation, and the school saying, okay, no problem, we will allow for segregation, is ridiculous. So and I'm gonna say this, but there are good teachers. There
Hmm.
are, and I would even say that I would highball it at 70% of the teachers out there are good and just want to teach. But the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and
Oh
that's where
sure.
we're getting to right now. And that being said, you have all these cultural pushes from every single angle. Now we look at it now, right? But it is in the now. And this is the book that I'm writing is it is in the now. This is something that started, and I would say it started back in the, if I had to roughly guess, that this new push for where we are now started in the 80s. It did.
Oh, I probably farther back. Honestly,
Um,
probably farther back. But yes. Um.
well,
ha-
I would, well, farther back well, in all honesty, it started when we got TV. But
Yeah.
in the 80s is when the push became very big, and the 90s is when the push exploded. Um, and early 2000s is when it started getting normalized, and 2010s is when it started getting weaponized. And the way that I've seen it in my book, and look, and what I mean by that is, you look, the civil rights movement, I'm all for it. Everyone should have equal rights. That's great. Um, People getting married, I don't care. Get married. You know, Getting married and forcing a church to have your wedding is a completely different issue, right?
Ooh, that one's
Because
dicey both ways. That one's dicey
yeah,
both ways.
no, no, but this is the thing. Look, this is the key point, though. You want to get married, have a wedding, no problem. If you find a preacher who's willing to marry you, I don't care. You walk up to a church and you say, I don't care what your belief is. You have to marry me because this is the law now. That's wrong.
Yeah. Well,
Because think of this, you're forcing someone else for their service. You cannot
I
force someone else's service for you.
see. I'm see that one. That one. Well, in principle, I agree with that concept. Here's the thing.
Hmm.
I've seen this too, right? Especially in the United States, right? Once upon a time, back in the civil rights movement in the '60s, if you had someone
Yeah.
that was black trying to get married, there would have been churches that would have refused those services too. So
And so
I'm
there's
a
a
look.
difference there. There's a difference, though. There's a difference there. And there's a
What's the
very big
difference?
difference between someone being black and someone being gay. It's a very big difference. Number one, right? Someone being black and being treated black for their ethnicity, right? And I never say race because we're all the human race, but for their ethnicity, right? That kind of discrimination versus someone who is gay, right? And there'll be debates back and forth, and disagree right now with the current pope for him trying to do this, but if you look at the religious beliefs of almost every single religion in the world, I say almost, I'm not saying all because I don't know them all, right? But if you look at the religion, there is a tenement in them for being gay, right? There is a commandment about it. There's a religious point of view on gay, right? Now, forcing that person, that church, let's go to the church, forcing that church to hold a gay wedding, right? Versus forcing that church to desegregate, right? That's a completely different thing, because you're looking at someone. It's the same thing. Like if I would say, okay, if I and I'm going to use a grotesquely bad example, right? I mean, grotesquely bad example. Um, if I say my religion doesn't allow fat women, fat men okay, but no fat women, right? Am I discriminating?
Yes,
Why?
because you're identifying what is different. You are identifying something different from what you idealize as other.
Exactly. But
So
here's the thing, though. Here's the threading the needle part, right? Is being overweight a right?
okay, so this is where nuance comes into play. And I'm going to say it
Exactly.
like this. No. Here's the thing. There are people of all different shapes and sizes in this world. Some of it has nothing to do with their eating habits. Some of it has nothing to do with their discipline or lack
Oh no, I,
thereof.
I agree with you
Oh,
there. Yes.
okay. So this is what I would go so far as to say. Where I personally look at it like this. I'd rather treat everybody the same. So, and that's what I think. Everybody should have the same rights, whatever. Now there are some nuances that have to be like the big thing about the whole
But
pronoun thing.
but Joshua,
Oh,
I'm
no,
not
no,
I'm not arguing against everyone not having the same right though.
no. But here's the thing.
Mm,
This is something that comes to my mind because again,
mm,
I didn't get I didn't get the vaccine either. So I got to literally walk in. So here, that argument can be used against it. I chose not to get the vaccine. And so for a very
mm,
brief period of time, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. And someone would say, well, we're not taking your rights away, right? But we're not going to, but we aren't going to do business with you. Now,
mm,
legally speaking, I could have forced the issue,
mm.
right? So I look at it like this. I think that, so this is where it gets kind of dicey. Well, I don't think anyone should be forced. Generally speaking, I don't think anyone should be forced to service people for
Mm,
whatever. For like, nobody should be forced to do that.
mm,
Right? If your reason, I don't necessarily. If your reason is ultimate, no matter how we justify, no matter how many ways we look at the issue, is
mhm,
that I see things, I believe things, I do things, I value things differently than me,
mhm.
right? I generally think the fault is in the person providing the service. That's just me.
See,
That's how I.
I disagree. I disagree, and my elementary school principal is the one that I based this belief on, and just
Okay.
because I consider him a great man, and he said one simple thing. When I was young, I was young boy, throwing rocks, punching people, and my friends punch people, and sometimes we would get into real, fights, me and my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, me and my friends were fighting, um, and we were really going at each other, like really going at each other. My nose was bloody, my friend's face, was bruised, and he just grabbed us and pulled us apart. And he said that he said two things. The first one was very simple. He goes, "While you're in this school, you are under my care, and I have to keep you safe. If you want to fight," he goes, "fine. Wait until you finish school and you go all the way back to your house. Once you get to your house and you're under your parents' care, I don't care what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not before that." And then he said the next thing, which is what I really really model my life after, is my rights end where your rights begin.
See it, but again, Now we're crossing this one.
I know, but let me explain it. Let me explain it and how it works, right? And we'll jump into the pronoun thing real quick here, right? Um, I'm a man. I use the standard pronouns because that's the English language. I'm sorry if anyone else is offended. You cannot be multiple people. You cannot be they. You cannot be we, because that will break down communication. That's the simple verse. It's immutable. All right. If you dress up as a woman and completely present yourself as a woman and you want to be pronounced she, most likely people will call you she. But if you come into a shop and you're wearing a beard and a huge tattoo that says I whatever hairy chest, the whole thing, and you want to be called she, that's going to be hard to do because it's not going to break the language. And I'll give you a good example with that in a minute. But just to get to the pronoun thing, right? So where do my rights end? My rights end where I tell you to use language for me. And the facetious answer would be, well, you ask people to call you by a name, right? Or they'll call you Mister, or this is how you ask people to treat you. It's not about that. It's not about respect. It's about basically very simple things. I cannot and I should not force whatever words come out of your mouth. It's no matter how polite I approach it, no matter how polite I request it, it is wrong. And for me, wrong is wrong. Now, that being said, there are social norms. There are social norms. But to the key point, if I walk up to you and I go, my name is Bob and my pronouns are they, them, I'm intentionally pushing on you to use they, them to me. Right? You're not asking. I'm not. I'm intentionally pushing. If you walk up to me and you say, "Hi, may I have your pronouns?" That's a completely different issue.
Mm-hmm.
But if I walk up to you and I say, "I'm Bob. These are my pronouns. This is what you should use when you talk to me," that's where I'm overstepping the rights. Right? That's where I'm overstepping the rights. So going to the reason why the pronouns are immutable is very, very simple, and I'll give a very, very easy example, because this example is, though it sounds extreme, it's it proves the veracity of the language, right? And the reason why we have this. So it's very simple. You have two people standing off to the side. One of them uses regular pronouns he, she, right? The other one wants to be called they, them. The person who uses she, right, or he, or whatever, the person A, let's say person A uses she or he, right? Person B uses they, them. Person A is deathly allergic to mushrooms, will die eating mushrooms. They're gonna order a pizza, one pizza, okay? They want pizza with mushrooms. She is allergic to pizzas. So you're going to order the pizza and get on the phone and say, yeah, we would like a pizza. And they want a pizza with mushrooms. You've just killed person A because of the misuse of language. And being a writer, being an English teacher, at one point in the US, being an English professor, right? Teaching English from grade school all the way through to university, where I am now teaching over here, knowing the language as I do. Not this is not a argument from authority, but knowing the language as I do and trying to teach communication, it is invaluable to know what someone else is trying to communicate, and you
Mm-hmm.
need that. So that's why I don't agree with the pronoun changes that people are trying to put out there. Besides the fact that there are so many that people have lost count, but the root value of this is I cannot force someone, and I should never have the right to force someone by walking up to them and saying, you must do this because it's for me. The vaccine, the same way. You must do this because it's for me.
So, okay, I'm gonna be. I'm gonna approach this one very delicately because I think I want this to be understood here. I have talked to quite a few people who identify as trans. They see themselves as different sexes, and the thing is, I don't argue them on that. It's not my place. I don't know what they feel like. I don't know.
I agree.
All right. Now, so there's two nuances to it. Like I don't. I don't think the pronoun thing is going to last either, to be very honest with you, because what it ultimately comes down to is I can't control someone else's expectations of me. That's what it ultimately comes down to. So I don't think it's going to last. I don't think it's tenable to expect people to identify. I think in a long-term format. That doesn't mean you don't identify as those things. I think everybody has pronouns. I think everybody has their own way of identifying themselves, and I don't shirk that one bit. I've
Okay.
talked to too many people that have had to explain some of those feelings on the inside. I have no context for it, so I'm not even going to pretend to understand that, right? Right. I have friends that identify like it's all kinds of things. One of them, I have a friend, one someone I'm really close to. She identifies herself as she they. I have other friends they them. I've seen people that go like he him, whatever. That's fine by me. I'm never going to knock someone for having it. What I do think though, and this is what I think is going to happen inevitably. There's two, right? I don't think it's going to last because I just think from an expectation point of view, it's not tenable. I'm going to have whether like it or lump it, I'm going to have certain expectations of you when my first impression. They can be corrected. They always can be, but I'm always going to have it. Now that all said, I'm also of the mindset too, just of the nature of just who I am. I'm going to let people be whoever they want to be. I'm never going to
No, I agree.
All right, I'm never gonna say yay, nay. If someone wants to identify them, I've had people come on this show identify themselves by their pronouns, and that's totally fine by me. I have people who don't, because again, much like me, I don't have the same value for my own pronouns that other people do. But just as someone that has, again, I'm one of my novels I'm working on. I'm dealing with a character that goes through a temporary sex change, and I wanted to have a little understanding of that mindset a little bit. So I've asked some questions quietly to some people just to kind of get a feeling what that actually that feeling of not being like your own skin not fitting how you see yourself, because that's very much a thing, and I'm not insensitive to that. And
I agree. But see, I agree with you. I think you missed my argument, though. I agree with you, but I think you missed my argument. My argument was you cannot walk up to me and tell me what I should call you.
no, you can't force me. No.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I also know like this. Okay, let's do something simple, right? I call you Jin because that's your first
Okay.
name. That's how I know you, right? Right. Let's say I come up with something that hurts you. Let's say I call you Gingy. I'm not saying I'm not like
Yeah.
you're right. Let's say I bothered you just for the hypothetical
Okay.
right? You can't force me not to say it, right? But at the same time, there's also kind of a point where I'm an asshole.
Well, in Canada, I could because can't you be jailed in Canada for misgendering?
I don't know off the top of my head, but again, going with something that's it, expectations.
Yeah.
I can't control people's expectations. I can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
How people see me is how people see me, and vice versa. I think, and that's what again. My whole thing about the pronoun thing with people going out, this is to me, and again, this is the I think the downfall to them is it doesn't like human expectations are always going to be there, and you can't overcome that, and you shouldn't. But that all said, if someone goes to me, and I've worked with people like this and go, listen, I identify as a man, and I look like this, I identify as a man, or I look like this, I identify as this. Okay, and then I try, right? That's all I can do, right? And that's what I think, and that's the thing. Like you're right, they can't force me, but at the same time, there just comes a point. There comes a point where I gotta look at it. I gotta look at it like this. I can't. My expectations, whatever, right? This is about for me, and this is me maybe just me looking at it from the point of view of having a guest on the show. This maybe like just basic hospitality, right? I really don't care how you identify yourself, and if I can do it to the best of my ability, I'll just do what I can. Now again, there are other things about some of this I'm asking questions about that I'm not going to go into here, because I don't think either of us are qualified to have that conversation. Is those are questions I have, but going, I do not like your self-image, whatever that self-image is. I may not see that self-image. I can't. It's impossible for me to see that self-image, right? But that doesn't mean that once I know that what you see yourself as, I can't encourage it. It doesn't hurt me to do that, and that's kind of how I.
Well, that's fine, and I agree with you. I agree with you 100% there. The question is still stands is, let's say we go to a party, me and you. We walk into a party, and as soon as we walk in, someone we don't know walks up to us and says, "These are my pronouns. You must use them whenever you talk to me, or talk about me, or mention me." Have they crossed your personal rights?
See, if they do it like that, again, it's all about presentation. I find is the thing. When I have dealt with people who do identify as a different sex than what I expect them to when I first see them, I'll say it like that. Most of the time, that's not their approach. Most of the time,
but I'm using an extreme version though.
No. I'm going to answer your question. But this needs to be understood up front. Most of the time, that's not what they're doing. Most of the time, when I have dealt with it, right? When I have dealt with it, I have found that unless it's really, really early on in that process, right? It's usually, I identify myself as this. This is how I see myself. Can you please? It's usually very polite. Usually,
okay,
right? When you do it the way you're doing it, you're going to force a confrontation. By its very nature, you're going to force a confrontation, right? Because it's like there's an or else implied there. And again, human nature goes like this: or else what? Now I want right? That's the question in your head.
Exactly.
And right, and if someone's really abrasive and forceful with me, I tend to push back. But if someone is just very gentle and reasonable with me, I'm not going to push either, right? So this is one of those situations where I look at it like this: if you're going to come across that your way of thinking is the only way of thinking, and this is the only way it has to be, or else, I'm probably giving you the finger, right? But that's anybody. That's anybody on any point of view, right? I'm probably going to give you the finger. Now, if you're going to come at me and go, "This is how I see things," and again, you explain your position you explain your position. You have an actual explanation of your position. Even if I don't agree with it, I'm going to respect it, right? Because it's one of those. But again, it's all about that presentation at that moment in time, right? If you try to force people into a box, this is what happens to happen. Right? You try to force people like, this is the right way, you will do this or else, I'm probably going to punch you in the face.
See, but here's the issue. Here's the issue, though. It is about presentation. It is. And the idea about presentation, though, is if someone comes up to you and says, "Well, this is what can you please do this?" You say, "Okay." They very politely they did it, and then the next time you're already at a new position, they come into a little bit more, and
it's
unlike the slippery slope argument, this is not a slippery slope argument. This is a wearing out over time, because now, and I don't know about Canada, but now in the U.S., the military itself is pushing pronoun guidance, right? Which in my opinion, I'm sorry, if you're in the middle of a fight, you shouldn't be worrying about someone's pronouns and their feelings getting hurt, right?
It's a different. It's a bit of an extreme thing, but this is
and we go back to a year ago. I think a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, a San Diego teacher sued the school for a student misgendering them. and got cash value.
Yes.
See, that's a problem.
Oh,
That's a very deep problem because you're if someone walks up to you and says, "I'm not going to call you this," right? Because I don't agree with it. You sue and get cash value for it. You have crossed their rights. Very plain
but
and simple.
so okay, this is what tends to happen. This is how I see this, and this is the thing. I've seen this kind of thing with other
Just wait. Could you move your head a little bit to your right? The
right
sun.
here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the sun.
So here's the thing. What's going on right now has happened with. I've seen this pattern zillions of times. Right. I've seen it. I saw it. With other things. We have this tendency when we say, well, this is the world has this tendency when they say, well, we have discovered this new and right thing and we're going to make everybody do it. And what happens is, and the way it goes about doing it creates resentment. Whether it's right or wrong isn't really the issue at this point. It's not really about right or wrong. It's the fact that it's now, instead of having a conversation, or instead of like I just said, that very polite thing I've mentioned, right? That's usually as far as it's gone with me, right? I've never seen it go past that point. And I say it like that because what I want people to understand is, right, that's most people. Most people are moderate. What you're talking about is the big difference between today and, say, the last 40 years is we've become more extreme. There's an extremism that exists now that didn't exist in the 80s and 90s. Sorry, I really started in the 2000s, and it's now a regular part of the norm, right? Instead of having a moderate, nuanced discussion about things, right? Like I said, go with the pronoun thing. I have my doubts it's going to last. Now that all said, that doesn't mean I don't think people don't have pronouns. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the way we're going about it, I don't think it's sustainable. That's me, right? Now, that's my interpretation of it. Now, again, a nuanced discussion about it, I'm open to with anybody, right? About the pros and the cons. But the thing is, we live in this world. We have to do this now, and this will last until something else comes up next year, and we have to do that now. Then something else will come up next year, and we have to do that now. All the while, nothing really gets accomplished. Talk about the trans movement. It's Dave Chappelle did a show, and he had one of the best quotes I've ever heard. I don't care if you. He had a trans friend, and
I saw that show. I saw that show.
yeah. That quote is, "I don't care if you understand me. I need you to respect that I have a human experience." That's what this is about. It's the fact that it's the fact of the matter is, I don't like everybody's a human being, and every walk of life is unique and wonderful, filled with ups and downs and all these things. And their journey is as valid as mine and anybody else's. But instead of talking about that and talking about how we can treat each other better, we get into a pronoun fight. Why do we get into a pronoun fight? Because it doesn't deal with any real issues. Same. You keep divides that way with those extremes, and you distract people from real issues, so you're not aware of what's going on around you. That's what happens. That's what this stuff creates. It's not like, yes, language. Like, I'm very concerned about how language, how it can be used, interpreted, and how it can shape ideas going forward. Language is a super powerful tool. And I'm well aware that my word choices can change the nature of what you will think about as an idea. And that's very powerful. And what we're talking about ultimately is that thing. And the big difference, and the big thing I hope that comes from this from my end, is it's the presentation of it. The big organizations, the big news outlets, the big universities, the big systems are always going to take it to the extreme, because
because that's how they make their money.
that's
On the
the
extreme.
But that's right. That's part of it. But the other part of it too is it keeps us divided. It keeps us divided. So if I take it to an extreme, well, some people are going to buy into it completely. Some people are maybe like, hey, that's not a good idea. Hey, that's not the way you see things. So I say it like that because this is something like we all need to be aware of with our own ideas too. Is any idea taken to an extreme is a bad idea. But the intention. Like I said, we can go with pronouns. We can go with any of this stuff. Heck, even with the vaccine stuff. I mean, the idea of making everybody well, happy, and healthy, and going back to normal is a great idea in theory, right? But again, the moment we force people to try to do something that they're not comfortable with, the moment we try to go into an extreme with these things, right? It gets dicey, and I mean, the only time an extreme might be justified is if people are so extreme set in their ways. Then it might take an extreme to get them out of it. But that's it. Like the rest of the time, most of the time, it's live and let live, man, and that's all you can do. But again, in that world, we're not fighting. We might disagree, but we're not fighting.
Exactly.
Right. And in that world, the companies make no money, and that's
Exactly.
ultimately, and that is something I understand. So it's also why I don't really talk. I have political opinions, as
Hmm.
this conversation is definitely illustrated. But I also they're not. I'm not really. I don't really consider myself right or left. I consider myself
Hmm.
just me. Now,
Yeah.
someone I'm sure will identify to me as right one way or left the other, and I understand why you might do that. Truth is, that
Hmm.
puts me in a box. I'm not in that box. I'm me.
Mm.
So let's have a real and take people out of these boxes. Take yourself out of your little box.
Hmm.
See who you really are. That's actually the best. And that I think in terms of everything we've talked about actually on this episode. Um, like again, we talked about some really extreme stuff, but we also talked about. But
Yeah.
I mean, but at the same time, we had discussions about it. And the fact of the matter is, if you have made it this far without being offended or thrown my podcast away in protest, you need to have these discussions, right? Because these are the discussions that are going to it defangs those discussions too a little bit. The more you
Of
talk about
course.
this, right? So that's again we talk about we mentioned the Polish killing the German killing innocent people back in the
Mm.
early on in this conversation, but it's true with anything. Something becomes extreme or something becomes taboo because no one's willing to talk or look at those things. It becomes this monster that has to be slain. But the moment we start talking about these things, right? Now, again, there are some things Jin said here I definitely don't agree with. There's some things he says I definitely do agree with, right? But yes, because we're human beings, right? Hopefully, I made him think a little bit, vice versa, right?
Of
So,
course.
right? So now, will I change his mind? Maybe, maybe not. That's really not the point. The point is, you come out and you have these conversations and you try to understand, like I said, with me, what I've learned doing this show more than anything else on this show is that everybody's different, and that
Mm.
everybody, and that I have learned that my own personal, my own standards don't matter in the grand scheme. And what I mean by that is, for me, for do this show, and the way I want to do this show is I want to make everybody feel welcome to come on the show. Doesn't matter who you are,
Mm.
what you believe, what you represent. I don't care. It's you I'm interested in, right? So I'm going to go out of my way to make people feel comfortable enough to talk about whatever they want to talk about. And even if I don't understand everything they're talking about, I'm going to be very, very open to those things.
And
And
that's your right.
yeah,
That's
but
your right.
but but it's also like for me, it's a necessity. It's the nature
Mm.
of this show. It's the nature of who I am and why I'm trusted. That's why.
Mm.
That's why. So, right, I will have a conversation about someone about being trans over here, even though I may be completely out of my element. Right, it's just one of
Mm.
those things where it's just like I'll learn something. Right, so I'll have a conversation about glitter, just because what the hell, right? So
Mm.
that's the and it's the fact that I am tolerant of all these things. That's why anybody can be themselves on the show, right?
No,
And
I
it's
agree with you.
yeah, that's it.
And like my point is not anti-trans. You can identify
Oh
however you want.
no,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. My point is very simple, and it goes back to this
Force.
and where this branches off is going back to where the way doctors are being treated to be by the pharmaceutical companies. You must do this treatment. You can't do
Yep.
this one,
And,
right?
and,
The same thing is you cannot force someone to do something against their will because that you're violating their rights and you're
well,
violating the patient's rights.
like I said, it's like I said, we talked about some like extreme examples here earlier of what maybe when
Mm.
that might. And we mentioned the church thing earlier, right?
Yeah,
But the thing is, as a general rule of thumb, this is what happens when you force people to do something. This is what I've learned: you create resentment. You're not going
yeah,
to you're not going to ease the tension. You're actually going to increase it. So now, again, in extreme places, maybe an extreme responses were called for. It is called for, but again, something else that's also I think very clear in this episode. There's not a one size fits all solution everywhere,
exactly.
right? So I tend to, like I said, and that's kind of why I tend to go along the lines of freedom at the end of the day, because honestly, it there's an equilibrium if everybody's free, even if
Yeah,
again, right? There's an equilibrium, and I say that like that because, um, again, we are so. I guess the other thing I'm really sick of, I think, in this time in this place, is a lot of people have this idea about what is right. And I don't know about you, but as I get older, I'm less sure about that than I was when I was young,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
I'm less sure. I realize that, you know what, my path that I've walked in my life is not the same as everybody else's. It's also like why I'm very and I can't hold anyone, I mean, to my standards. I mean,
Mm.
the only person I can hold to that really is me. And if I'm paying you, I'm holding you to a standard too because that's required. But
Mm.
besides that, I'm not going to do it because what the hell do I know, right?
I agree. But the issue, like going back to the gay wedding, right? The part of that argument wasn't whether or not they can or can't get married. I made it very clear, like
Oh
if they
no,
want to get
sure.
married, have a wedding, and they find a priest that wants to marry them, I don't care about that. I
Oh
care
no,
about
no,
when they
no.
go to for
Oh,
the church to do it.
I understand. And what I point out to you, all I point out to you is because there are definitely, I've lived in spots in the United States where whatever the law was, there'd be no way there'd be a gay wedding in some of those, even now in some of those
Mm.
places, right? So, I mean, in those places, what do you do? Because that is bigotry. At the end of the day, and that's in those
No, I agree.
situations,
I agree with you. I agree with you there.
right?
But
So,
in those spots though, um, like let's say I live in this town where I live right now, and they're like, no matter what the law is, you cannot have a gay wedding here. Now, in those spots right there, it is incumbent on the gay community, if there is a gay community in that area, and people who support their own friends and want to stand with their friends. This is a key point where you draw the line in the sand, right? It is incumbent on them to start first, right? And I'm not talking about kicking down the door of the church. I'm like, at the bare minimum, they should be treated equally. And if they want to have a wedding, they can have a wedding. But the problem is kicking down the door of a church and saying you're gonna host my wedding is different from having equal rights to have a wedding.
I, I think this ultimately comes down to, again, what I said about presentation.
Mm.
Um, so again, I can see, again, something I said, no one should be in a perfect world, no one's forced to do anything. But
Mm.
let's. I lived in the Mormon community about 15 years ago, and in that community, I had a buddy of mine who was gay, but he was an outlier because it was very, very, very extremely
Mm.
one place. Like I've seen that extreme up close, to such a point that he was actually contemplating marrying a friend to hide the fact that he was gay.
Mm.
I cannot stress to you, like in like that place, in that particular place, oh, it was against their tenant. It's absolutely against their tenant. But at the same time, like, so he never felt Like that's why he left. Like that's one of the reasons he left.
There's a key point though. He left.
But here's the thing: if he had been in a situation where there would have been more tolerance, and this is where I'm getting at, right? If he had been in a situation where all things being equal, everybody's tolerated equally, he never would have felt the need to leave. At least not for that reason, right?
But here's where do you cross the line? And this is basically the Mormon Church, right? If the government comes and goes like, you're the Mormon Church, but you should allow gay people in as well. Now you have the government interfering in people's beliefs.
Yeah, but again, this is the thing. This is where I was getting across to you. There are extreme circumstances in some places. No matter what, this is it. This isn't a perfect answer because it's not. It will create resentment. It will create some hostility. There's no way around that. But at the same time, they're not going to change on their own either. So what?
But they shouldn't. They shouldn't though.
A
church, and talking about people's religious beliefs, not social beliefs, not social mandates.
I would go so far to say that in towns like that, the church is the community, and they usually is. So if the church won't change, the community won't either. Everything will be underbound. Everything, the expectations of that, and I've seen it, man. And the expectations of those places.
No, this is probably just because it's my personality. this, and I'm not to besmirch your friend at all. If it was me, and I have been put in this kind of position before. In fact, in my own community here in Japan. For those people who don't know, when you buy a house, there's no homeowners or organization at all. But you do become part of the community, and you join what's called the community group, right? When you join the community group in Japan, sometimes there's members' fees. You pay money for the local fire department, right? For the volunteers. You pay money for keeping the area clean. You do volunteer work through them. It's a very big thing. When I first joined, and this is when I first joined, they go like, you have to pay this much money per year. I'm like, okay, how much is it? It's going to be about $300. I'm like, okay, what's it for? And I'm sitting there speaking in Japanese. Right? Speaking in Japanese, I'm like, what's it for? And they're like, regular maintenance. There's a festival we have in the summertime, and there's other stuff here and there, and you're going to come to these meetings. I'm like, okay, fine. Then the guy goes, you also have to pay an extra $600. I'm like, why? He goes, well, 20 years ago, this one guy paid a loan to build the roads that lead to all these houses. I'm like, you mean the city roads that go to my house? He goes, yeah. Someone actually paid the money to get it paved here before the city would. Right? I'm like, okay. What's it have to do with me? Well, this money's for that loan. I'm like, that was 20 years ago. Didn't he pay off the loan? Yeah. Did the taxes pay off the loan? Yeah. So why do I have to pay? Well, because we all do. My answer was no. And this is where the person jumped the track. He turned to my wife at the time, and he goes, hey, you should pay this money. I said, talk to me, not to her. I told her to take my son outside, and I said, I'll make you a deal. I'll pay the $600 for this road. I will not pay any other money for the community ever again. Not a single dime. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You get 600 now, or the community funds. Which one do you want? He goes, oh, no, sorry. The community funds, fine. So I left. Then the same guy came up to my door because you get an envelope. Because here's the monthly dues, the community. There was the 600 again. I said, I told you, take this back. I'm not going to pay this. Take it back. Come back with a clean envelope. I'm not going to deal with this, right? Now, not to besmirch your friend, but if I was gay in a Mormon community, I would not. And this is something that's always been a failure of mine. I can't keep my mouth shut at all. So I would be there like, yeah, I'm gay and I'm Mormon, so what? And risking ostracization by the whole community but they would still like a thorn on their foot. They wouldn't be able to take me out, right?
See,
And not everyone's built like me. I know that. Not everyone's built like me. I know that. But there are. We go back to and I'm not trying to equate myself with civil rights people, but I learned very early on, especially where I was raised. I learned very early on when you get discriminated against and being someone who actually faced real discrimination, not someone verbally abusing me, like real discrimination, to the point where I was treated differently just because I'm Mexican, right? In California in the 80s, yeah, it was wonderful and great in certain parts, but where I was raised, real
mhm.
discrimination.
Oh yeah.
So being raised in that, I learned very early on, don't keep your mouth shut. If someone tries to shut it for you, keep going. And so that's the difference here. And not to besmirch your friend, but the only way those real tight knit communities are going to change is with people actually taking a stand,
I hmm.
not with government, not with government.
Oh, I how do I put this? The expectations of where both of you are were very different, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get across to you. He was raised in a place, and you go to these very tight knit communities like this, you will see
Yeah.
this. There are expectations set on
Mm-hmm.
you. Now, I again, I've seen it. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. Like I said, my dad's from Detroit, like from like the '60s, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And you learn in those environments when you have that kind of extremity that you stand up for yourself or you get run over. That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
just the way it is, right? But in an environment like that, it's not about standing up for yourself and getting run over or getting right. That's not. It's different. It's a little bit. In some ways, it's more insidious. Again, people
Well,
are
can I ask you a question?
mm,
Can I ask you a question? Um, weren't all communities that tightly knit before the civil rights movements?
not no, not like this. Not quite like this. This I would
They
bigger
they
cities.
needed armed officers to start desegregation.
Well, no, what I no, no. What I'm going to say is this: you're. I'm going to assume you're from a larger. How big was the city you grew up in? San Diego?
No.
How big?
I'll give you an example. My high school, including all the staff, only had 100 people.
Okay,
Very small, very tight community.
very small, very tight
So so
community.
so so tight that if I was jaywalking, my mother would know about it before I even got home.
That's a lot of small towns. But have you ever been in a place where it's so where I have found that places with a very dominant one way of thinking, whether it's a religious or
Yeah.
otherwise, whether it's religious or otherwise,
Girls disappear to go have a child somewhere else and then come back, and the parents would call it a vacation. That's how
yeah,
tight
yeah,
my community was.
yeah. No, I get it, and everybody knew what was really going on, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, all right, I've been to those too, right? Even so, in places like this, and this is where I'm just getting across. All I'm saying is, what tends to happen in situations like this is the expectations themselves tend to be like white lies, and people just play along with
Yeah.
them. But and then
Yeah.
eventually they chafe. Eventually
Yeah.
they chafe. So that's what happened to my friend, and not just my friend. There's lots of, and it's not even just for those reasons, other reasons too. Like people leave these communities for those reasons. They just don't fit that whatever that is. More often than not, though, in communities I have found in communities like that, right? Everything's quiet. Everything's a hush hush. Everything's under until a breaking point. You of some
Yeah.
kind, right?
Yeah.
So that's just the way they generally are. Now, like I said, bigger places, right? And it depends what those expectations are too, right? Like I said, it's not just a wiring thing. It's also like an environment thing. There's a lot of factors in that, and again, it's one of those things like when I went to that community, when I went to work in that community, I just realized that there was a certain degree of retention that was in the air all the time,
Mm.
right? And do you want to make the waves? Now, like I said, I'm me. So but I generally keep to myself. I'm a very live and let
Mm.
live kind of guy. So I tend to
Mm.
do. I'm okay pretty much anywhere.
Mm.
I didn't learn how to really stand up for myself until after I actually lived in a community like that. And there, right? So, but you have to go through that, and
Yes.
right, that's the thing, right? So, um, there again, it's one of those things where I would go so far to say that I think that everybody's experiences and everybody's experiences. Yes, personality too, but everybody's experiences also are a little bit different. And I don't always think there's a perfect answer either. Right,
Oh, I
right.
agree.
Right. I don't think there's a perfect answer either. Um, do I think there are places like that need to have that extremism in a town dealt with from the outside? I do. Sometimes I do think that might be the only answer, even though it's not a perfect answer either. I know the problems with it, but I also
Mhm.
sometimes I again, this is one of those things where you look at it and go, well, what else can we do? Because this isn't going to change on its own, at least not anytime soon, right? So
But
I
see,
mean,
I'm from the other side of the view though. Like that community, if it doesn't change from the inside, I don't believe we should forcibly force them to change.
but and that, but
Like,
again, but
well, for the church, for the church part itself, like if your friend was openly gay and walked into the store and they refused to sell to them, that's a completely different thing. So the onus
but the
is
thing,
on everyone.
but in communities like that, that can happen. That's my
Mm.
point, right? Yes, you're not going after. Yes, you're not necessarily going after the church per se in the terms of, let's just put it to you this way. Um, Generally speaking, churches that you force that inside a church, it's probably a church you
Mm.
shouldn't go to anyway. They're going to be very hostile towards you, and they're not going to treat you good. They
Exactly.
right. They're just going to find other ways to mistreat you. Generally what happens there, right? But again, when you have like churches like that have such a huge pull on the community in terms of the way the community is and acts, that's a that those lines are a lot dicier, dude. They really are. It's not cut and dry going after just
No,
this
I
one
agree.
thing
I
versus the
agree.
right.
I
Not
no,
that.
I agree, but with the tensions being that high, um, and I'm not faulting your friend for leaving, but with the tensions being that high, eventually, like in my hometown, it will reach a breaking point where people
Sure.
like me will be created, and people
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
me, where we don't move away, we don't stand up, we don't stay quiet. You know, we sit there and we make the waves. Those
Yes.
people eventually come,
Oh no,
and that's why
that
human nature will take care of that community.
oh, eventually maybe, but at the same time, right? When does that happen in a community, right?
This is what people do. This is what people don't see, right? Is when it does happen, the people who are ardent holders of those values that deny that change, they're the ones that end up leaving somewhere else.
But again,
And that's
but this is where I'm getting to you on. How long does that take? And there, like I said, and the
I don't know.
reason that's my point, and
I
that's
don't
my
know.
point, and that's my point,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes there isn't a perfect answer
No, there
either,
isn't.
right? So, I mean, letting nature tend to itself is more often not the best way to deal. I agree with you there,
Mm.
but even I will look at you and go, there are some situations where I'm like, you know what? Because I know this isn't a perfect situation. I know this isn't going to fix the problem right away,
Mm.
right? But sometimes there are communities that do need those kicks in the pants too, and
Of course.
right.
Well, like
So,
what I did, from my own personal experience, what I did with this community is, about 5 years ago, I left this community.
mhm.
Like I left the group. And they asked me, "Are you moving?" I said, "No, I'm just not going to be a member of this community. I'm not going to pay money for this anymore. Right? I'm not going to pay the funds into the community because what happened was I eventually made it to a mid-tier boss of the community, right? Organizer, stuff like that. And for someone like me, it's a problem when you show me your books and the books don't add up.
Mm-hmm.
I basically, so
Basic
what
integrity.
happened? Yeah. What happened was I looked at the books and they gave me money at the end of the year. I'm like, what's this money for? Because you were organized for this tier, right? And everyone was getting envelopes of cash. And the very top guy got a huge envelope of cash. I'm like, wait a minute, these are the funds that we pay to this, right? But I was still, I'm like, okay, so fine, right?
Yep.
Then a couple days later, they're like, we're gonna have a trip for all the leaders of the community, and we're gonna go somewhere to this onsen, this hot spring, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I can't go. I'm taking my family on a vacation. Okay. I'm like, this is volunteer, right? I don't want to miss a meeting because at that point I was like, I need to be part of the Japanese community, right? Because I was getting my citizenship, the whole thing. And they're like, no, don't worry, it's just a trip. Come January, they try to charge me for the trip for not going. And I was like, no, I don't care if it's a dollar. I don't care if it's $100. I don't care. I'm not paying it. I'm done. I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
And the corruption, I drew the line. And my wife at the time goes, is it okay if we leave the community? Because can we still use the trash can? I'm like, I can still go into the community center, rent a room. That's a community center run by the city. Where we drop our trash off, because we don't have trash pickup on the street from our house. We have to take it to a trash collection place. Like that's owned by the city. So my ex-wife was talking about all these things, going like, can we still use these public utilities? I'm like, yes, we can, because it's part of the public. But like, they don't understand. Like, in fact, many Japanese people still join these communities because they think it's required by law.
Mm-hmm.
So now the people around me here, they see me. I'm not a member of the community, and I'm still living here happily, go freely, and I'm saving all this money. I've been approached on the down low very quietly by
Mm-hmm.
6 different households, going like,
Yes.
how did you leave? What should we do? Right?
Yep.
Because they're sick of the corruption too.
Oh, sure.
So, but that's the thing. These communities will eventually break.
Oh no.
But
Oh no.
how long it takes, don't know.
Yeah. And that's my point, right? Sometimes from the outside in, is like I said, there's no perfect answer, dude. Like, and then this is the thing. I mean, does he suffer? Does my friend suffer?
Yeah,
Right. And this is
it's
where
his
I'm coming.
choice what he does.
That's the thing. Does he suffer in staying in a community like that when he's that isolated? Does he bail? Right, and that's the
Mm.
thing. And the thing is, if the choice, and just for what that choice,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. So I mean, or that lack of choice, or whatever you might, however you view that, right? Because you know what, that's the thing, right? I'm very much, I'm like I said, I'm very much a live and let live kind of guy.
Yeah, yeah,
and,
yeah.
and when I see that a community or a system in place, right, is pushing against it, I want to fight it. But I also understand that everybody's got to kind of figure out their own way of doing that.
Exactly.
And right, and and also, I mean, you got, but also, I mean, getting to those points where groups unite and change and want to evolve and grow and stuff like that, that's a process too. And that very much, and thing is, it might not happen while you're there. And I've seen that too. That's why a lot of them choose to leave, right? So because
Mm.
right, it's not going to change on its own anytime soon, even if I do stand up. And it's about picking your battles at that point.
Of course,
Right,
of course.
right. So I again, it's not all of which to say, going full circle here, right? A full
Hmm.
circle here. Um, by and large, I do. Again, I'm very live and let live. I'm very
Mm.
much, if unless I can absolutely see that what's going on is absolutely harming people, right? I do not necessarily believe in entering and changing any courses, right? But people do is their
Mm.
what people do is their business. But when it
Yeah.
does create harm, when it does create a certain extreme, even though again I don't think it is a perfect solution. I don't think it's the
Mm.
right way of going about things. I don't necessarily think it, but that's it. Force. That's why it's very important when you, like, we live in a world sometimes force is required. whether it's illegal, whether it's like that. We do live in that
Yeah,
world. We do live in that world,
that is true.
right? So then the question isn't like, do we stop the force? The question is, how do we minimize it in a way that we actually is more, because force loses power the more it's used. That's why, like, when you mentioned some of the things you were mentioning earlier, everything goes straight to the force right away. So guess what tends to
Yeah.
happen? Eventually, you get sick of it, and you say, let's find out what the consequences really are. That's human nature. But if you do it in such a way where, again, everybody's tolerant, everybody's polite, everybody is approaching like a conversation, and if that still doesn't work and negotiations break down and things just not going to change, then that's when force can sometimes be a difference. But it's, again, I'm not saying I'm not.
I think force is the final option. It's not
No,
it's
I
not
agree with
the
you.
yeah.
No. I agree with you there. I completely agree with you there. But I
And
think we're
government involvement, I think, is also, in my
it should
opinion, government. It's not. It shouldn't be right off the bat. It shouldn't be,
no
because government has a way of messing things up even worse.
almost always, right? That's I agree with you there. But again, going to that situation, sometimes, right? What do you do, right? And that's kind of what and that's a but discerning when we get to that what do you do moment, what else can you do, right? And getting to that point, that's the tricky part.
Yeah.
That's the really, really, really tricky part, right? So going now back to your book, full circle. I think it's interesting. Like I said, me and you have both lived through the era where people would listen, have a conversation, like, right, would maybe compromise, right? And again, anyone that's made it to this entire conversation, hats off to you if you didn't want to throw hay brick through a window. But I say it like that because what I'm saying, like even I, as much as I do value freedom, I do see like even I can't. There are a few situations I can think of. It's like, yeah, maybe someone should from the outside just come in and do something. That maybe is the right thing. That is the right thing to do, even if it's not a perfect solution. Now, I think we've come to the point where we've gone so far the other way, where so many times it's come from the outside that it doesn't really work. Especially, I mean, we're not going to go in too deep today, especially when we live in a world where government and big business lack integrity, accountability, and transparency. I would be very wary of government involvement at this point. But at the same time, right, even I, as much as I hate it, I have to acknowledge that maybe every once in a while, right, maybe it is the right thing to do, right? Maybe. But again, I'm with you completely on this. All other options have to fail. I would
Yeah.
rather it be the last thing. But sometimes you have to. Like I said, and in that particular case, right? I mentioned my friend. Maybe if he had been in a better environment, maybe he would have stayed. Maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he still would have left. But
Yeah.
would have been for a better. But maybe it would have been for a better reason. And he's
But
certainly
but
not.
the very
Right.
but the very interesting thing about the U.S. is a lot of the very small towns that are very close knit. Eventually, those towns disappear because people leave, whether it's
Yes.
for one pressure point or another pressure point. But eventually, enough people leave where those towns start to just disappear.
No, absolutely. But again, that is a process too. That is a
Yeah.
process. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time,
Yep.
and in the process, how many people are harmed in the journey? And that's an
Yeah.
interesting question, right? That's an
That's a
interesting.
hard question
Yes, but
because
that's
it's
yeah.
well, if we take the extremist view, we try to say not a single person, or when the first person is harmed, we should do something about it. I When I was younger, there was, I don't know if it's true, but there was a law in California, I think, where three people had to die at an intersection for it to get a stop sign. Not get injured or hit by a car, but die. And I don't know if it's true. It's what I was told. Um, but that sense of like we can't step in until someone gets hurt. We can't step into this point. Um, I think if we had more integrity in our companies, um, and to use a simple thing, like everyone uses Google, it's become a meme now. Google it, right? But if the big corporations had integrity in them, right, they would be able to open up the conversation and let both people speak without it becoming a screaming match or
Mhm.
something that was just becomes for clicks. Now, had we taken that path, I don't know where we would be here today, but definitely had we taken that path, people would be more informed.
More informed, we would listen more, and we compromise more.
Exactly,
Right?
and then we'd be in a better place. But how better, I don't know.
A lot better. Not it wouldn't be perfect, but it'd be a lot better.
Yeah,
We'd be a lot happier. Like then that's the honest truth. We'd be a lot happier. Um, but like I said, that's when I see someone being harmed by something, I note the difference because that's usually a
yeah,
failure somewhere in the system. It's usually a failure. Again, there's no such thing as a perfect system, but there is but you got to be very careful that don't make an exclusive system. 'Cause that's
yeah.
when things go really south. On that note, Jen,
No,
I,
great
I,
conversation. What we? How long do we go?
almost 2 hours.
Well,
Almost 2 hours.
wow.
Oh
No,
yeah,
no, very, very enjoyable.
yes. I think I made you think.
No, I think you did, but I also think that we actually share the same line of thinking. We're just approaching it differently.
Yeah. No,
I
no,
do.
we're not.
Um,
We're not that different. Like I'm like to be very honest with you, um, we're not. Again, we are different in some things. There are some
yeah.
things we definitely do see differently, but our core ideas aren't that different. Like
No, no, I agree.
yeah, right, aren't that different. It's just for us what we see. Like again, it's the nature of what we've experienced and how we've seen
Yeah,
things, right? Um, again, and going and if nothing else from this conversation you can walk away from, it's this. Um, we each have different roads, and we are going to see things
yeah.
differently, and that's okay, right? That's
I agree.
okay. Yeah, right. That's the way the world works. That's the way the world works.
No, and I agree. The key point at the end of the day is two people can sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, that's it.
I agree with you completely, and that's what's lacking, I think, with our youth. We need to sit down and have a conversation.
Yep. Like I said, just be careful of the young versus old stuff too. That too can be a trap.
Oh yeah, I know.
They're more they see some things more than we do, and it's
Yeah.
and I am very well aware of that. It's like oh yeah, last thing. So my dad went on was for about 2 3 years went on like a whole millennial kick, and I looked at him and was like, Dad, you fell for it. I actually was like, you completely fell for it, right? It's like, well, they don't see the same things I did. No, they're not. They're not going to. They're different. They live in a different
Of
time and
course,
a
of
different
course.
world than you.
But what's very interesting is like not the millennials, but the generation after the millennials has come out to be more conservative, even than me.
Yeah. Well,
There's
no.
the research is showing it.
Well, last thing we'll touch on, then we'll
Mm.
plug your stuff. We are going to come like the next, I think 8 years is going to be, I think especially in the United States, is going to be about people taking their rights back. I think that's a
I
big,
hope so.
big.
I
I
hope so.
I think so. I think the pandemic pretty much kind of rocked some people out of that. People want to understand where this information is coming from. People want to feel like they're a little bit more in control. And that's why I kind of think that the Republicans are going to take the White House again. Is because that's basically what a lot of their like campaigning has been for the last little bit. I think that's where I think we're going into that. I think that's going to be a very big part of the next 5. Censorship's going to be a big thing. I mean, it's a very quiet thing right now. It's not so quiet. I mean, I don't know if you were Barrington's trial, among other things, but I mean,
Mhm.
there's definitely a pullback from people taking back power. I don't know about Japan. I don't know about the rest of the world, but in the United States, it's a very big thing. In Canada, in light of what's happened this year, that too is a very big thing. like considering what's going on right this minute, I don't think I'll be voting Liberal or NDP anytime soon. I'm not sure I'm not the only one that's in that boat. So I mean, all of which to say that you know we are in a precipice of change, and people are going to want to get their own power back. People want to change the world because again, we can't keep living like this. We just can't.
No, I agree. The voting in Canada, because we just had a couple of elections these past couple of months. Um, well, first of all, it's different, and just to explain out there, the United States is not a democracy. It's not democracy. It's a democratic republic. You vote for your electors to go and do stuff for you. Many of them get bought out by the corporations, so you should always be willing to vote them out, not just vote blindly. But even in Japan, I think I might have a copy in here. I had one. We get a newspaper before an election, and I don't have it here. We get a newspaper for election, and what it does is every candidate's speaking piece. They still do stumping over here, which they don't do in the U.S., where they stand on a corner and they start to talk.
Yep.
People can come or not. In the U.S., the stumping are always pre-planned and preset, and to be the most effective for their own people who are already going to vote for them. But when I do my voting, and I became a Japanese citizen so I could vote, and I want to live here forever. I have a deep vested interest in Japan, so in that sense, I read every candidate's stuff clearly. Then I argue about it with my friend. I have a Japanese friend to argue the points to see which one has more merit. And this past election, I was disappointed. And the reason why I was disappointed is because there's a reason why Democrats hold such power in the U.S. is because they appeal to the emotional most of the time. They appeal to vote for me for this feeling, and this became very apparent when Biden said on live radio said, "If you're not voting for me, you're not black." Right, a very clear statement. Um, so
That's
voted,
very ironic coming from him.
and he didn't
Right.
get apparently because he did so much against the black community. It was insane, but they just swept it under the rug because they want to get the other man out. And I'm very happy to say that all my family voted for Trump both times. All of my family. I'm very proud of them for that. Because number one, there's no way they were going to vote for Hillary with her warmongering, and Biden with his anti-minority stuff. There's no way. So, but that being said, voting here, there's a lot of candidates that are coming in now that are trying to appeal to that emotional. And I was very disappointed by that. But when I vote, I look at every single topic, and when the candidate swerves to the emotional, or when they cannot articulate their words, right? When then I don't vote for them. So I had a very this is the very first time I've had a very difficult time voting because I was almost pigeonholed into one candidate just because the other ones were just so egregiously bad. It's just,
All right.
but we gotta. I
We
think
get
we're gone.
we've gone quite a bit. We could talk, I'm sure, about lots of things.
Well,
I'm well aware of what American going on in American and Canadian politics. Japanese, I'm not so as familiar with, but I do know a few things, but not much. But I will say, I think we have an interview here. I think so. So, what do you want to plug? What do you want to plug?
all right. My website, Jin Okubo Films. It's JINOKUBO, the number one.com. Because my other website, I forgot to transfer over my domain name when I rebuilt it. So
Yeah.
you'll
Hold
find
on a
my
second
stuff
here.
there.
This is it.
Let
Did
me
I
see
get it?
here. Let me see here.
Hold on
I
a second.
No. Sorry. The it's Jinokubo, but the website itself is Jinokubo1.com. The
Okay.
website. That's it right there. So it's Jinokubo1. Yeah, not the other
There
one.
you go.
Um,
That one actually links to a page, so I'm assuming that is correct. Yes.
yeah, that is correct. So this, I'm actually working on two different films. I'm trying to finish this year. One of the, and I'm. Do you ever see Evil Dead?
Yes.
I'm trying to make a film like that.
Okay.
And my film company is on a shoestring budget. Um, I pay everything myself because number one, I don't want to be um, controlled. So I pay for everything myself out of my own pocket. So until I get big, that's what I do. I write screenplays as well, and I write books. My novel that I'm working on right now, which is more of an essay style novel, will not be released until end of next year. Right now, I'm adding the statistics, and I'm
Mhm.
adding the data points. I've already finished the commentary section, so I'm just going back and filling in my notes and stuff like that. I'm I am looking for, and as soon as I get enough money put together, I'm gonna be more proactive on this. I am looking for someone who's willing to draw a comic book. I have a six episode comic that I want to get done that I wrote, which is about it's almost like X Files for children.
Okay.
Um, with the main character as a girl, and people who read my stuff will realize that most of my novels, the protagonists tend to be women. Um, and basically I just prefer writing that way. Um, Other than that, when my other films are available on, I think it's Vimeo, so you can find me there. I used to be available on Amazon, but Amazon started putting too many restrictions on how to add subtitles. So I had to add subtitles even for English on English, and I had to add subtitles for so many things. So I just stopped, and I went to Vimeo. It's much easier for my stuff. So, but my links are on my webpage. You'll be able to find all my links to my
Okay.
movies and stuff.
So there he is, JinOkubo1.com. And that will do it for this episode. Tomorrow I'm doing 2 episodes: Heavy Metal Band, The Occult. I think it is Stormbound tomorrow. I got 3 metal bands this week, so I'm doing Stormbound tomorrow from Israel. It's gonna be this noon, and then on top of that, I'm doing Janie Taylor in the evening, making up for what happened on Thursday. But if anyone's interested, this is my advertising page. If you want me, I make videos for your projects and yourselves. You can go definitely check that out, and I do a bunch of different things there. So yeah, there's definitely that. And that will do it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. This was definitely a wild one. Like I said, so it was fun. Thanks for coming, Jen. And to everybody watching, everybody listening, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Stay inspired. Keep shining in the dark. And I'll see you guys next time. Give it a second here while it goes. Yes,